sick of riveting these snow flaps in all the time because it's easier to yank the skid out, reach around in there and stuff when you just have it off. So we're switching this thing to nutserts. Now that I've got the rear skid back in this thing with all the spring and high gear and all those changes that I did, I'm gonna move on to the front stuff now. This is where we're gonna kind of start to get a little in depth with things. But the first little clips here are gonna be relatively simple. We're just swapping the shocks out, taking these stock 1 3/4 body velocities off. They're gonna go and hang out on the wall over here. Gonna replace those with these 2-inch body units that came on the Boost Assault. Wenslaf went through these, rebuilt them. We've got dual rates on here, high-low adjusters, and my favorite part, the rebound adjust shafts on these. So I'm gonna start these with a baseline of 4 turns of preload. That's not very much. It's probably about 1/4 of an inch from taking up the slack. So you spin the collar until the springs just barely touch and you take all the free play out of them. And then I went 4 turns from there on each one. We'll just start right here and we'll go left to right. Regular Matryx trail spindle. This is what most of you are gonna have on your sled. 23 or 24 cross-country tall spindle. These are just shy of 1/2 inch taller from where your lower ball joint mounts to your ski bolt. And then over here, we have the 23 600R race sled tall spindle, and they are tall. These are a full 2 inches taller from ski bolt mounting point to your lower ball joint surface. And then they released for the 2024, I believe a revised and slightly taller yet than this, but I can't confirm that. I couldn't find part numbers for those yet. So that's neither here nor there. This is what we got on hand. 2 inches is drastic. It's gonna be a lot. You guys probably heard me in the past videos talking about I was waiting on these to come back from the machine shop. The reason for that was same with the Assault. So you can see right here, this is all one piece. And on the Assault, since this is relatively easy and simple to get to, you can get that to stand up there. We take the RMK spacer and we cut that much off of it so that we can move the ski center line out. These ones are similar to the old Axis spindle where it's also relatively easy to cut off. But these guys, on the other hand, is much, yikes. These are a lot harder to go and cut, you know. I was like, yeah, I could probably do it with a Sawzall or an air saw or something like that. It's not gonna be as nice as having them machined. I was like, I have some downtime, I might as well do it right. And while I'm at it, I'll just have them do these too, so that way I'm not trying to cut this perfectly straight again. So that's why these were at the machine shop, having this width taken off so that we can offset the ski center line if we want to. If we don't, we can just run this on the inside and go right back to the way that these were, with the ski perfectly centered within the ball joint axis. So what I'm hoping to achieve with these spindle changes is essentially bring the front ride height up, bring the center of gravity up, which is a negative, but with the spindle change and some other stuff, we're gonna try to correct that roll center to roll couple relationship and keep this thing from being incredibly tippy. The main purpose here, or main goal for me here, is to continue on with my theory of getting more usable shock stroke into that front track shock. So this is gonna go in that same kind of theory that some go with of pulling the limiter up, but it's gonna retain your stock limiter length and give you more usable travel within that shock. You're still gonna have the increased ski pressure. You're gonna have all the things that the limiter strap, pulling the limiter strap up does, without the negative of losing travel in that shock. Yes, this is significantly more expensive, but in my opinion, with the geometry background, this is the right way to go. That's enough about the spindles for now. I'm gonna get throwing these shocks in, do the usual time lapse of that whole process, and then that'll probably be it for tonight, and then we'll pick it back up in the morning and start playing with spindles. I did forget, and it is worth mentioning, that these new units do have the steel heim joints in them, which is a nice upgrade instead of these gross floppy weeble wobble bushings. Andy also sent me new O-rings and more of them, so I can double them up on each side instead of the factory one on each side, apparently. So if you're gonna double up your O-rings and you're gonna fish these in here, the bottom's not too bad because this is just stamped steel. You can kind of wiggle it, pinch the bushings and get them in there. The top with the cast, it's not that that's that much harder, but I'm gonna try to do this one-handed here. Get that lined up. And then these awesome kinematic straight jaws, get those on there. They go pretty deep so you can get both sides of the bushings and just give them a little squish and a wiggle. And that actually went better than I thought one-handed. But yeah, double O-rings, a little bit tight, but it's not too bad. A little grease, as you can see, a little greets. A little greets on them helps. All right, these are the old bushings that were in each of these spindles. So, I mean, new, but old now. I had to end up punching them out, right, so they get machined down. I'm reusing these. They're not, you know, great shape, but they're fine for test fitting this and getting it all sorted and figuring out which spindle I'm actually gonna run. My hope is to run the big tall boys and then take these for the assault, but we'll see. Either way, once these get powder coated, they'll get new bushings. But for now, we're pressing these bad boys back in. This number, that. Let it get itself squared up. Bop. Skis are on this. I'm shot. Shocks are on this one. Skis are swapped over on that one. That bad girl's ready to go. That's it for Friday night. I'm out of here. Okay, Saturday morning, we're gonna start throwing spindles on. Hopefully these bad boys work. If not, I know the cross country will be fine, but it's way less exciting. It's also not incredibly accurate, but I'm gonna put this on scales to try and get an idea of overall weight as it sits and then the weight distribution. Yeah, very inaccurate. It's not a good way to do it, but at least it's some sort of baseline and it's some numbers to kind of work off of. So. Normally, I wouldn't have the sketchy, spooky 2x4 under here, but I'd already marked the floor everywhere where the sled was sitting and the spots for the camera, so I had to put that in because this lift arm over here didn't reach far enough in to get on the bulkhead, so we're doing sketchy, spooky 2x4 today. So both cross countries are on. Got a slide on. Where's that little jobber there? This guy. Put our RMK spacer on. Oh, look at that. That's beautiful. Good job, Steve. Good job on the machining. So now we're gonna slap the skis on. For now, I'm keeping this all the same center line ball joint with the ski there. Ski in the center line of the ball joints for all my marking and pictures and comparisons and whatnot. I'm excited for these. Like I said, I know that those will work and do what I'm looking for and be a great middle ground, but that doesn't excite me much. This excites me. Trying this, going way outside the box, like we're going out there with these things. These are gonna pop the front of this thing way up in the air. Maybe with a 650, it won't have the power to pull wheelies all the time. So with that in mind, I may be able to let the limiter out farther and get the track back on the ground, which will give me more shock stroke. Obviously, the more track on the ground, the harder it is to turn. So there will be a middle ground and a balance there, just like everything else. But the thought of being able to let that limiter out and get even more shock stroke back into that front track shock really gets me going. So throwing these things on, let's see what they look like. Found our first little difference so far. It appears that the 600R race sled does have a slightly different ID for the tie rod pickup point. So this M10 by 1.5 outer tie rod from a trail version does not drop right in. No big deal, simple fix. Go in here, drill bit, punch that out, drop this in, and then we're back on the road. I'd like to point out and remind everyone that with all this spindle swapping around back and forth, all these nylock nuts, the nylon's thrashed now. So it doesn't have the holding capability or capacity that it had before. So for what I'm doing and before I go out on the snow, these are gonna be fine. I'm not worried about it. But I am gonna go on McMaster and order up some new nuts just because that's way cheaper than ordering them direct from Polaris. So these will all get replaced. So anyone or everyone, don't freak out. They're getting replaced because I know that that nylock is gone now. So knowing this tie rod pickup point is M10 by 1.5, 1.5 right here. Go in here, find our bit. I'm sure some nerd's gonna go, oh, you don't know that off the top of your head. Don't. Go 25/64. Just the same size we use for doing M6 by 1 nutser. I do know that off the top of my head. And I'm not concerned with clamping these in the vise because they are all going to get powder coated like that. Whoa, come on. You fucking little. Can we not do that? Done. Never use your hand as a hammer, or so they say. That one went a little better. Putting a little chamfer on these so the washer and the bolt head all sits nice and straight. Now I'm gonna clamp that. I would normally freehand that, but you guys are watching. Ta-da! One other thing I should touch on while we're talking about slight differences here. The upper control arm in the race sled spindle here, you can see there's a recess where it all sits down in. This upper control arm mount is about 1/8 of an inch closer to the lower control arm. What that essentially does, actually here, let me come over here first. You can see the recess really good on this one. I got this bad boy locked out. You can see, come down, contact right there. Prop this up all spooky and hopefully not drop everything 8,000 times. Do the same deal from the top where it seats. That there, you can see we got a little bit of a gap here. 1/8 of an inch, give or take. It's a light eighth. All right, digging into geometry stuff a little bit. All right, so I showed you the difference in the height between the upper control arm and the lower control arm here. What that does is it alters the camber curve as you go through your compression event. So with your lower control arm longer than your upper control arm, as these travel through their arc, your lower control arm begins to curve inward sooner than your lower. One way to kind of think of this is if you didn't have the sled in the way and you had these pivot points and nothing else attached, right? So say you just have this arm, it's pivoted on a pivot here that can go all the way around, and you kick that arm around, it's just gonna go in a circle. Same thing with the lower, right? So they're fixed off of these points, and they travel in an arc around a circle. So when you have this distance, say here, and these are a little bit closer together, as they travel up through, they're gonna maintain a more stable camber curve up through until a certain point. They're always gonna start to curve in and negative camber in. But changing this location changes that camber curve. So on the Assault, what I did, since I changed a lot of suspension geometry by going to the longer shocks up front, it altered the roll center and the center of gravity. I needed a little bit more bite in the corners without inducing a tipping sensation. And if you have your ski perfectly straight and you start to turn and it doesn't camber in as the body rolls, it's gonna be more likely to flip over on this side, right? So even if you say, this is gonna get kind of rambly here for a while, but say this is your carbide, right? And you're running a square shaper bar style, and you put this in sand and you try to push it around a curve like this, right? And you side load it, it's gonna wanna flip right over. If you take a round pipe and you do the same thing and you push it through, it's gonna continue to smooth or go through nice and smooth. It's not gonna have that tipping effect. Same thing happens when you start to body roll the sled and this stays perfectly straight. It doesn't start to camber in. So if it stays perfectly straight and you start to turn, it's gonna be way more likely to topple over. Whereas if, as the body rolls, this starts to camber in, it's gonna dig in and try to carve more. So on the Assault, when I raised everything up and I had to start correcting some things, I ended up spacing this upper ball joint up as much as I dared and still had engagement into the nylock nut. And what that did is as that starts to roll and compress, it starts to camber that ski over and induce negative camber, which digs that carbide in and helps it carve around the corner. I'm assuming on this race sled spindle, they brought this distance closer together to try and maintain a more neutral camber throughout the stroke, because in the snowcross situation, they're having drastic compression events, right? They're going from full droop to very deep into the compression stroke, sometimes bottoming out, whatever, but it's cycling a lot more than your traditional average trail sled would. So I believe that is probably the reason why they tightened this gap up, to try and maintain a more stable camber curve. Now the cross-country spindle is the same as the trail one, which induces a little bit of negative camber. Obviously, like I said, I did more on the Assault by spacing this up. So as this arm travels, it starts to arc inward sooner, which then pulls the spindle in, cambers the ski. One more thing to touch on is that if you induce the negative camber and everything right, the sled will still have that tendency to try and topple over if it's too high and if geometries are way out of whack. Another thing I did was, I touched on this in the actual video of the Assault, the overview, is stiffening the roll bar. So when you bring everything up in terms of center of gravity and you start changing the roll center, it's gonna have that tipping sensation no matter what. I'm not saying that just adding negative camber is gonna remove that sled wanting to tip. You're gonna start to have to add roll stiffness into this thing. You can try it with spring rate. I found that when you start going really stiff on the spring, it doesn't give. You need some roll to it so that the suspension can start to work, because if it's just stiff as a board and super oversprung, it's just gonna wanna flip right over. It's not gonna have any give. All that weight is just gonna push into that spring until it can't anymore, and then it's just gonna start to lift, which is, you don't want that. So spring appropriately and then start stiffening up your roll bar or whatever you can do. All right, we're very limited on these, to increase your roll stiffness so that as it does start to pitch, the suspension can actually catch that weight and manage it appropriately and start to roll, start to dig, plant the ski, and then hold steady from there and not continue to dive, and also not hit a point where it just then starts to lift the ski. So that's where you need this ample set in, so that as it starts to roll, the other ski still has motion control on the other side. Because if you go way too far on your spring and you're way oversprung, you're always going to be riding on the end of the spring. And as you go into the corner, this side's not going to start to roll. You're not going to dig the ski. Well, you will dig the ski, but not as much as if you actually start to load it and put more of that weight over there, right? If it's all on the end of the spring, as soon as you go into that corner, it's just going to come up because the other side has no droop. The other side can't maintain contact, and everything's just going to start to come up. Too stiff is no good. There's always a balance to everything. Oh man, I always feel like I just continue to ramble and slightly get off of topic, and then I feel like it's not going to make sense. So in the comments here, if things don't make sense at all and I do that, please let me know so I can try to correct that somehow. I'm not really sure how the fuck I would ever go about doing that. I hope that makes sense. I hope that covers potentially why there is that change there and why I did what I did on the Assault. Hope that helped. Another fun difference on the 600R race sled spindle that I've just found, I thought I measured these when I got them, but apparently I didn't, or if I did, I did it really poorly. Anyway, the tie rod pickup point is 1/8 of an inch closer to the center line of the ball joints and is offset inboard more as well. But, you know, to explain this a little bit farther with the tie rod pickup, when you move this in, you got to think of this being a lever from your center line. So the farther out you go, the more leverage you're going to have to turn that ski in the snow. The shorter you go, the less leverage you're going to have. So that's why you see sometimes, I think for Yamahas and some of the Arctic Cats, they make a bolt-on kit that moves your pickup point out farther, and they call that like the power steering kit, because you're increasing the leverage, but you're reducing your turning radius at the same time. because the longer you go out here, the bigger of an arc you have to make to get the same angles. So hopefully this is lined up right. If you come off of the center line here, you can see this pickup point is inboard a little bit farther than a factory one too. I haven't measured that one yet. But if it were perfectly centered in line here, when as soon as it comes past center, it has to start curving on that arc. Whereas if it's inboard, it can kind of come outwards a little bit. So that little bit of buffer zone down here before it really starts to create an arc is going to kind of dull down and stabilize your off-center handling a little bit. So the shortness is going to increase that. But then you're going to combat it by moving it in. So it shouldn't have like this crazy gnarly aggressive where you start to turn and it's going to try to dive right away. It should be quick and nimble, but then once you get past a certain point, that's really going to start going. It's just an interesting change that they've made compared to the trail ones, and I'm curious to see how it feels out on the snow if I get them to that point. You know, I might put it on the ground and be like, holy shit, this thing's way off with these, but time will tell. Again, I hope that rambling makes sense. There's a lot going on up here that may not be coming out of here properly. So along with the tie rod differences, right? Obviously the alignment's going to be way out to lunch, not even close, in the same ballpark. So rather than go and undo the boot and do all the inner the right way, I'm just going to cheat it for now so that it looks close for my visual pictures and whatnot. I'm just going to break the nut free out here, do 2 or 3 turns or whatever, write that down, and then if I go back to the other spindles, I can do that. If I keep the other ones, I'll still do my 2 or 3 turns back out and adjust it the right way. But for now, I just want to let you guys know how I'm going to go about doing this so that it looks somewhat close for the pictures and the remainder of the video and whatnot. We're going to cheat it. Our race sled spindles are on. While it's up in the air, before I let it down to check these ones out, I'm going to go ahead and yank that sway bar off and drill my holes, 1 on each side, so that I can bump those end links forward if I want to. I'm going to want to. But I'm going to do that now. And yeah, usual explanation, time lapse, let it down. Look at it, more explanation, ramble, ramble, ramble. Front track shocks off the ground. The limiter is tight right now. Woo! Oh, you love it when a plan comes together, huh? This is a few days after getting these spindles and everything on. Circling back because I had a big whole in-depth discussion filmed and everything about roll center and all the geometry stuff up front, but I ended up making the video like almost 45 minutes long. I feel like that's just way too much. So unless there's a demand for an in-depth video discussing that and the roll center and the jacking forces and things like that, I'm probably not going to do one, like I said, unless there's demand for it. So if there's a bunch of comments that are like, yeah, we want to see that, I'll do like a 20-25 minute video in depth about that stuff. But for now, I'm just going to try and keep it really quick and simple. You have your roll center, your center of gravity, instant center points, all this stuff. And essentially that is center of gravity, right, is somewhere on the sled. Once you add the rider, it's totally different than just looking at it static like this. But if you pick a point and say your center of gravity is up here, then you start drawing your lines for your kinematics, which is the dynamic movement of all these geometry points and the leverages and forces and how they all interact. You start drawing lines from these two control arms across to the other side. They will eventually intersect at what's called your instantaneous center, or your instant center. Then from your contact patch, you draw another line up to that. And then once you do it on the other side, where those two contact patch to instant center lines intersect, that is called your roll center. So the quickest and dirtiest way to explain this is the distance from your roll center, where those lines intersect, to your center of gravity creates your roll couple, which is a moment arm which influences the weight of the machine side to side. So that's what changes your body roll, right? You can dictate your roll couple by moving points around and changing things, and that changes the dynamics of the vehicle. A shorter roll couple will give you less body roll. It'll make it feel a little bit more dynamic and nimble and quick. Longer will give you more leverage to force that sled side to side. You also have to factor in jacking forces, so then when you have different angles of your control arms and the way that the forces are fed from the ground or from the chassis through each other, you can put more force into the mechanical control arms and links and get forces that way. So as it tries to roll, the mechanical leverages from one side to the other will end up stabilizing the chassis, or they'll make it roll more. It's very in-depth and very involved, and that's why that video the stuff I had filmed went way too long. So just like quick and dirty, imagine the top of your broom here is, the hell is that? Oh, load of stone coming in. Imagine the top of your broom is like your center of gravity, right? And then say your fist, wherever you grab the broom, is your roll center. You grab it up here, you don't really have a lot of leverage to force this back and forth, right? You can see how it reacts quickly, it goes back and forth, it's kind of nimble. If you grab it way down here, you create this long moment arm. See how I can't really, you can still do it side to side, but it takes a lot more force to keep it steady. So that's where if you do have a long roll couple, you end up having to incorporate more roll stiffness to keep this from body rolling and pitching way over side to side. So trying to keep this in frame, I can kind of see in the reflection here. See how this is like way more wallowy and it changes direction slower and it's harder to maintain. If you grip it up here, you're back and forth super nimble. So that's what changing the roll couple, roll center, center of gravity, all that relationship does. It changes the dynamics of the vehicle. That is what I am striving to achieve, is a different relationship with these spindles to create the dynamic feeling of the snowmobile that I want. That's pretty much as quick and dirty and simple as I can make that. Again, this is the problem. It gets so rambly, and like I said earlier, there's a lot going on up here, trying to figure out how to put it into words that will make sense to come out of here, to go to this, to go to the thing. I do have the roll centers and all that stuff plotted out. I did plot the stock, the cross-country spindle, plotted this setup. I plotted this with theoretical changes at the ski widening or changing the contact patch center point, with the upper control arms spaced around. Plotted some Skidoo stuff for comparisons. Cross-country spindle for 95% of people is an amazing bolt-on upgrade that will get a lot of people in the really, really right direction. Again, it depends on what theory you want to run with. Everyone does things differently. You can go, with a different spring route, like I touched on earlier, but then you end up sacrificing small bump compliance and overall motion control. You can just also leave the damn thing alone and ride it. That's what a lot of people are going to want to do. But I think it's interesting for me to get this stuff out there and kind of explain these theories, and hopefully it helps people get a grasp on why certain sleds react the way that they do. Earlier in the video I mentioned weights and things like that. So with this spindle setup, it did end up moving the weight on the skid. I think it was 5% rearward, which overall weight change from front to rear from stock was roughly 12%. Somewhere along those lines. I had it all written down. It's in the office somewhere. Either way, it's about 20 pounds more on the tail of the skid than it was before. So the difference from the cross-country spindle to these was not as drastic as I expected, because the cross-country spindle itself, that 1/2 inch, was enough to start getting that front track shock up off of the ground. So from there, the extra 2 inches change was not as drastic as I expected. But however, overall, from stock to these spindles, there is 20 pounds more towards the rear half of the skid, let's say, just to keep it simple, which is perfect for me, because that's going to help use more of that torsion spring preload initially, right? So I'm gonna get a little bit deeper of a sag, which I needed because these were a little bit stiffer than I anticipated. Even planning ahead, getting the light duties and trimming that tail and everything and where I mounted it, it was still a little bit more than I expected. So this spindle change helped me in that regard. All in all, I think these are gonna work really good. The tie rod pickup point changes, the way it's gonna change the steering feel. It's all working the way that I want it to go, and more of that dynamic, faster responding type feel for what I want. Anyway, you know, someone else could probably hop on it and be like, this feels really weird. Why is it doing what it's doing? And I'll be like, oh, because I'm a nerd and it's because of this, this, and this, and this. But yeah. Again, I'm trying to keep this quick and simple so that this video is not astronomically long, even though it seems like all these 650 build ones are gonna be in that roughly 30-minute range. So please let me know if that's way too long, if I need to chop these up into more parts or more segments. I can certainly do that and keep them in that 10 to 15-minute range. All right, that's gonna wrap it up for the spindle video. Like I said, if you guys want more in-depth geometry stuff, let me know. I can put something together for that. Moving on to the next video will be some funky airbox modifications. Got some of these guys. So stay tuned for those. That should be pretty interesting as well. Most of this 650 stuff is gonna kind of be different, weird nerd stuff that I think is cool. So stay tuned.